1 year ago, almost exactly, I opened up Blender and I modeled my first ever character. Okay, in my defense, I was not trying to model a human. I was trying to model a character from one of my favorite games of all time, Spiral Knights. I was trying to make the helmet, and that's why his head is so pointy. In addition to essentially being a collection of bendy rectangles, this model also obviously showed that I did not have a basic understanding of normal maps, as evidenced by the entire model being completely inside out, as well as rigging and weight painting. Just look at this animation. He also has little nubs for ears, kind of like Vincent van Gogh. Now, after I modeled this character and saw the somewhat disastrous results, I almost gave up on 3D modeling. I've been wanting to make a game for years, and every time I start, I just feel like I find a hurdle that I can't get over, and I stop. This time, it was 3D modeling. But after that, I spent a few months thinking about game ideas, and I think something has finally clicked.
The next time I picked up Blender, I modeled one character, Becky. And then I modeled her again. And then again and again. And eventually I got something that I was okay with. Then I modeled another character. And then I modeled a third character. And another. And I kept modeling. And I got better at it. I've repeatedly said that art scares me, but every day I practice, it scares me less. When I sit down at my computer to start working on a new character, I don't have a mini panic attack anymore. In fact, I get kind of excited at what I'll be able to create next. It feels empowering. I wanted to take this devlog to focus on my personal art journey and how my attitude has shifted to what I think is a much healthier mindset about art. Now, the extent of my art skills from before starting to learn Blender are essentially summed up by this painting I made for my wife.
Nice shot!
I don't think I have to describe it. As you can tell, I'm basically just like Vincent van Gogh, just with both my ears. I'm a misunderstood artistic genius. I'm horribly underappreciated in my own time. I have severely crippling mental illness. Now, the last devlog I made has a single comment on it. Thank you, Eric. But that comment asked me to go more in depth about how long it takes me to learn some of this stuff and how long it takes me to do some of the 3D modeling that I've been doing. So I'm going to add a total hours counter in the bottom left. Some of this is approximation, and some of this is me timing how long it takes me to do things. I think it should give you a pretty good idea of how much time I've spent so far on just the art and modeling of this project. So of course with Blender, the first thing I did was learn the absolute basics of 3D modeling before attempting to model what would become this unholy blockhead inside-out shadow demon. I'll be honest, I don't have any idea how long I spent doing this, but it couldn't have been less than 20 hours to research and model this model. So let's call that 20 hours. Then I gave up, and I took a break from working on any 3D modeling. I came back, and I had forgotten most of 3D modeling, so I rewatched a couple of the old YouTube videos I found to refamiliarize myself with Blender. Then we got to Becky. Becky 1 took me an entire weekend. Like, seriously, like actually an entire weekend. 20 hours of nonstop work. I can get a little bit obsessive sometimes. Becky 2 took me another 16 hours or so, but spread out over the course of a week. Becky 3 was an absolute disaster from the start. It probably took me 3 or 4 hours to realize that it was a lost cause. And Becky 4 and 5 were where I started to adapt existing assets for parts of the character. This sped up iteration, and I was able to do both of these in about 22 hours total. Don't try to model everything yourself, especially if you are a solo developer and you don't know how to 3D model, which is exactly where I am. After that, I got tired of modeling Becky and I modeled this motel, which is basically a bunch of rectangles, so it was like 4 hours. I watched some videos on topology and retopologizing models, which were super helpful. Topology is like cracked. I've learned that good topology with nice clean edge loops can make adjusting the model so much easier. I would highly recommend learning topology fundamentals if you're thinking about getting into 3D modeling. Or don't. Don't let me tell you how to live your life. Vincent van Gogh only listened to the voices in his own head, and look how that turned out for him. I also spent some time learning how to texture paint in Blender, and by the end of my next YouTube binge, I'd probably consumed about 11 or 12 hours of educational content, and I was ready. Now, I was also lucky that my wife, whom I will not cheat on with my producer, and not just because I don't have a producer, is an awesome artist and did this amazing sketch of some character ideas I had, which is what I used as inspiration for the next few characters I modeled. So I got started modeling David, the first character who wasn't Becky. This went surprisingly well. I got through this model in about 4 evenings, and generally I can get about 4 hours of work in per evening, so I'd say that was probably about 16 hours worth of work. David is a fisher. Fishers are highly aggressive and territorial mammals. I was really happy with this model and immediately got to work on my second model, Eric. Yes, the same Eric that commented on my last video. Except this one is a raccoon that lives in a dumpster behind the diner that David runs. Eric took me another 4 nights to model and paint. This is where I started to get into what the gamer girls and jazz musicians call the zone. My next few models took me 3 nights each, and I was just banging them out. Bah, 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 bah. My next model was Kara. Kara went great until I got to her boobas, when I realized, well, crap, I don't know how to model booba. So I did what any reasonable human would do, and I went to Google and typed in furry girl, and I got exactly what I expected. I decided to use this shark furry OC as sort of a reference for booba. Wait, can a shark be considered a furry? It has no fur, so wouldn't it be like a scaly or something? Sharks have scales, right? Like small scales. Wouldn't that also be like what furry snakes and lizards are called? Is this a problem that like the furry community has already addressed? Is there an answer for this? If you're a furry and you're watching this video, can you comment? Is this like actually, has this already been solved? Anyways, I use the shark furry as a reference for modeling Kara's boobas. They're a bit Laura Croft circa 1996, but you can't really tell in game, so it's fine. The points kind of go away. She's a lynx, and I had a ton of fun modeling her face shape. The little black patches of fur sort of look like Cheetos, so I might need to redo that, but other than that, I think it looks great. Now, Cameron was up next. Making Cameron's shirt was super fun, but I still have some work to do on the rigging to make sure his shirt doesn't clip through his body so much. And I think I weight painted it wrong because this part of his shirt just like hangs around and I think isn't weight painted at all, so no animation gets applied to it. Cameron is an otter, and I'm also planning to add some droopy whiskers to really give him that signature otter look with the big face lobes and whiskers. Edward. Ed is a woodpecker and is the first bird I've modeled since Becky. I used a different wing asset this time, one I thought would fit the woodpecker a little bit better than the wings I was using for Becky. I also cut little holes into the back of his Hawaiian shirt. I have a headcanon going about my bird characters where they all had to cut holes in their shirt sleeves for their wings to fit. And then eventually like some really entrepreneurial bird realized, hey, I can just sell shirts with this feature already cut in. And now birds have to buy like separate shirts than mammals do. He's also got some serious clipping that I need to fix, either with better weight painting or honestly just deleting the torso underneath his shirt because you're never gonna be able to see it. Spoiler alert, Edward does not strip out of his Hawaiian shirt in the game. Finally, we get to the mayor of this town that I have not named yet, Charles. He took me a full 4 days because I had to figure out how to model an undershirt collar as well as his suit jacket. I think it actually turned out fantastic though. I'm super proud of this model. I also made him a little rounder because he's a little tubby. He's a little tubbo politician. Because the politicians are always tubbo from all those lobbyists feeding them tubbo meals. Unlike Vincent van Gogh, who went on a hunger strike for most of his life to prove that you can in fact survive off of eating paint chips. So that's the total time I've spent on 3D modeling so far. So let's take a moment to talk about how I model these characters, because I've talked a lot about the timing, but I haven't talked about my process, my art pipeline. I start with a couple of models that I've just downloaded off the internet. Now, I could have spent time to create these base models themselves, but honestly, I found that if I don't need to do that, then why should I do that? I'm a single person. I make small tweaks here and there to change the size and shape of the character, but it's really all just this one model. I also found this group of animal masks on BlendSwap that are a really good starting point for animal faces, because they look relatively humanoid but still resemble the animal. For each character, I choose one of these masks that resembles the animal that I want, and then I just edit the mask until it looks like face. I also usually add a subdivision surface modifier and smoothing so that it looks a little bit less blocky and a little bit more like an actual character. This definitely isn't a perfect process, but it's fast, and it doesn't matter if the topology of the faces isn't exactly where I need it to be because I don't plan on doing any animations for the faces. I plan on doing a lot of characterization with the dialogue and the portraits of the characters that are going to come up when the character is speaking. I also rigged up an entire skeleton for this base model, so every time I create a new character, it's using the same skeleton. This makes it really easy to retarget animations onto new characters I bring into Unreal, although it doesn't always work great. And then the final step is texture painting. So I start just by blocking out the basic color shapes that I want on the head. Then I use a softening tool to sort of blend all the colors together. And then I go through with a smudge tool and I kind of make it look like fur. This creates a nice illusion of fur without the faces actually having any depth to them. I'm sure there are more art techniques that I am not employing here. I have no idea how to bake a texture. I don't even know what baking a texture means still, and I've been trying to figure it out. Please, somebody explain to me what baking means. Now, it's worth noting this time includes rigging and weight painting, but I haven't quite figured out that whole animation thing yet, so I do plan to spend more time on these existing characters, making the animations more consistent, and generally just cleaning up the models. Like I said, adding some whiskers, adding some more fine details. And speaking of animations, very smooth transition, I also wanted to talk about how I'm approaching animation. I am not approaching animation. If 3D modeling is like the Slenderman of art, then animation has to be like the Cthulhu or the Shoggoth. It's just cosmic horror beyond comprehension for me. I've taken to rigging and weight painting all my models, and then to test how well they'll animate, then I just shake them around like that one game from Mario Party 8. I then just bring them into Unreal, and so far I've been retargeting some default animations provided by Epic Games onto the model's skeletons. This is why they all sway perfectly in sync with each other like a clumsy newborn hive mind. My plan is to use animations and assets on the Unreal Marketplace or on Mixamo and then just retarget them onto my characters. This way, I never have to deal with my ineptitude for animation. Some other miscellaneous things that I want to mention in this devlog: I added a vignette filter and some film grain to give the game a bit more of an analog, mysterious, dreary feeling. I learned this trick from Hollow Knight, which employs the same technique. I also desaturated the shadows ever so slightly to give the game more of a noir feeling, since noir films are typically black and white. I don't want to go all the way to black and white for this game, but I like the idea of desaturating things that aren't lit up a bit.
It's crazy to me to think that I've been working on this project for half a year now. I don't feel like a game dev yet, and that's probably because I'm not. I don't have any games out yet. So I'm gonna keep doing these devlogs, and I'm gonna keep working on my game. And hopefully one day I can look back on this and I can see where I got started, and I can call myself a real game developer, and maybe even a real YouTuber. Just like my favorite YouTuber turned game dev, Vincent Van